Ruth 1, 6 through 16. Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. With her two daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where she had been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to her two daughter-in-laws, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. "No," they said, "we want to go with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Why should you go on with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I am too old to marry again. And even if it were possible, and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not, my daughters. Things are far more bitter for me than that for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me." And again they wept together. But Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. "Look," Naomi said to her, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same." But Ruth replied, Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God."
Thank you, Mackenzie. I don't know if you've heard about this or not, but there is a movement afoot that started in Denmark, and it is kind of making its way across the planet at this time. The movement, if you want to call it that, is called Hygge. Hygge. It's actually spelled in English Hygee. It looks like Hygge, but it's pronounced Hygge. And Hygge is something that the Danes have been practicing for generations now. And the idea is that there are great moments of personal joy and satisfaction in our lives that can be aided by our behaviors, right down to the ways that we decorate our homes, or the clothes that we wear, or the smells that we smell, or the food that we prepare, the company we keep, and so forth. Now, it really boils down to something that is sort of simple to name and difficult to practice. In English, I think that the best translation I've heard for Hygge would actually be, and I don't even know if this is actually a word, but coziness. Coziness. You all know that feeling, right? You know exactly what I'm talking about. Those moments where you are at home, it's raining outside, you wrap up in a favorite blanket, you've got a warm cup of coffee or tea, maybe you have a fire in the fireplace, you watch the rain and you curl up with a good book or a favorite TV show, or you play cards with a family member or a friend, and you just get that feeling all over yourself, that good, cozy feeling that just says, yes, this is kind of nice. It's the reason that sometimes when the roads are going to be bad or we get a snow day, that we kind of get excited about it. Okay, good. We can just sort of hunker down and enjoy each other's company and stay in, know where to go. We're here for good. Danes, of course, live in a climate with lousy weather. They live in very expensive, compact housing units. They ride bicycles everywhere, which may or may not sound fun to you. And so they have mastered this concept of what it means to take advantage of and make the most of these moments that they have then termed Hygge. And so Hygge will include things like wearing your flannel pajamas. It'll mean turning off all the lights or dimming them and just using candles. It means burning something that smells good, like a candle or some incense. It means the longer it takes to prepare a meal, the more Hygge that meal will have for you. Okay, and I'm not making this up. I have received 2 books in the past year, one from a family member, one from a friend, about Hygge. This one here is a New York Times bestseller, The Little Book of Hygge. And don't take it from me, take it from Meek Viking, The author and, get this, the CEO of the Happiness Research Institute. Not a bad gig being the CEO of the Happiness Research Institute. There are chapters in here devoted to the kind of furniture or the kind of architecture or the lamps that you might want to pick out. It talks about how fireplaces are more common in Denmark than they are in England, not because the climate is radically different, but because of the amount of hygge that they provide. This whole idea of that slowing down sometimes means that simpler or slower is better. Now, the reason that I think that this is catching on and why this is spreading like wildfire from Scandinavia into the rest of the world is because that many of us have sort of reached a tipping point with how much we can take, about how fast our lives can be, and how we have begun to associate convenience with good. I mean, obviously, you know what I'm talking about. We keep advancing in technology and other things that will make life more convenient, and instead of allowing that to actually bring convenience and ease to our lives, it just means that we can now pile on more. I mean, you all have experienced this where you remember the days when you would write somebody a letter and you would say a reasonable time frame to reply would be in 10 or 14 days. Now people get frustrated if you don't return their email in 45 minutes. Why have a phone call with someone or go to visit someone when you can send a one-sentence text full of typos and cute little smiley faces that communicate the same thing? But you know that there's not the same thing happening. Now, I bring this up because I read an article earlier this year, last month, in the Christian Century, which is a publication that I received, and the editor wrote this interesting short piece in there, and he called it The Inconvenience of Going to Church. He brought this up because he was talking to friends who said how much they really enjoy being able to live stream a worship service at home, and it doesn't stop them from having breakfast or doing other things and having the service on in the background. And they feel like that's good. What convenience that offers. But my guess is that you and I both feel the same way by virtue of your presence here this morning, that you feel like there is maybe something that isn't there. Maybe that isn't the right kind of way that you want to worship, or the kind that brings satisfaction to your life. I don't want to call it worship hygge, but let's be honest. There's something that you know is important about being here that's different than just tuning into a website. Not to say that that's not a great way to reach people, or that some of our military overseas, or our homebound members, or people traveling on vacation, and so forth. I understand the value of it, don't get me wrong. But there's a difference, isn't there? And you understand that. So I'm going to read to you an excerpt from this piece written by Peter Marty from the Christian Century. He says in this article called Going to Church is Inconvenient. I've decided that making Sabbath worship an integral part of one's life is highly inconvenient. For those who stay away from communal worship because Sunday is the day to arrange personal leisure, take special care of oneself, or get the kids off to soccer, making time for church is just plain inconvenient. On the other hand, for those of us who make church a priority, Sabbath worship is equally inconvenient, though in a different way. We sing songs we didn't pick. We hear scriptures we didn't choose. We commit to endeavors for which we must sacrifice. And here's the worst, sometimes sit next to people who aren't even our closest friends. Now, those who regularly avoid going to church often harbor misconceptions about religion and see it as an antique way of life. Plenty of cultural Christians I know seem indifferent to God and are convinced that the church's priorities are out of line. But in a world of customized living, where a mobile device can effortlessly order up my preferences and bring most everything to my doorstep, church is simply inconvenient. Church pulls me away from my self-designed life and requires that I take some initiative in another world that has nothing in common with, quote, doing whatever I please, unquote. Convenience often feels great, but it's not an unalloyed good. if I exercise only when it's convenient, or buy groceries only at the convenience store, or drink coffee only from paper cups, these choices do not make for a good life. Inconveniences can hold their own deep value, especially when they ask us to experience a larger life than the one we typically design around our personal comfort. Now, I don't know how that sets with you exactly, but I guess I think he's spot on. There are some things in this life that are good because they're convenient, but there are just as many that aren't necessarily good because they're convenient. You know, I hope, that by coming to church, by taking part in a worshiping community, and by doing things that are not necessarily on your time or on your schedule or by your convenience, means that you are making a sacrifice in order to do them. But I would argue that there is a difference, a strong difference, between convenience and satisfaction. When we were talking about what it means to be the church and what I was preaching about a couple of weeks ago, and I summed it up when Jesus says in Matthew that you are the salt of the earth, and I encouraged you to think about SALT as an acronym which meant serving, adoring, learning, and telling, SALT. That none of those things are things that we do at our convenience if we are truly to be a Christ follower. Following Jesus means that you are putting the priorities of your faith ahead of your own creature comforts. And sometimes that makes things more challenging, and God never promises that it's going to be easy for us, but I will tell you this, that I believe strongly that it will ultimately lead to greater satisfaction in your life. Now, Mackenzie just read to us from the book of Ruth, which is a fabulous short story in the Bible. And if you haven't read Ruth in a while, go back and do that. It'll take you just a short amount of time, but a great story. To sum up the beginning of the book, you remember that Ruth is a newly married woman. And she moves in with her husband and her husband's family. It's a father and two brothers, and a mother-in-law and a sister-in-law, and Ruth. And they're all living together. And they move into the land of Moab, which is an area where Ruth is from. This is the area just east of the Jordan River. Today we'd probably call that area Jordan. So they're in Moab, and famine strikes, and what's worse, all three of the men in the family die. So now you have three widows. And they're struggling with what to do next. And Ruth looks to her mother-in-law, Naomi, and Naomi says, I can't care for you guys. I mean, you're young women, and I'm not going to get married and instantly conceive and bear children, and they will be sons, and they will grow up quickly, and then you can marry them, as would be the custom. You marry the brothers, but there's no children left. And so she says, here's the deal. You'd be better off just going back to where you came from. Go back to your mother's homes. Go back to your land, your people, your families, and the gods that you worshipped. She says, I am of the people of Judah. I am going to go back to my people because I have heard that God has provided food in that land once more, and I'm going to go there. And the two daughters-in-law say, well, let us go with you, Naomi. No. Go back to your families and your gods. After some protest, one of the daughters-in-law, Orpah, says, I will do that. Okay. Begrudgingly, she leaves. But Ruth clings to Naomi, her mother-in-law, and says, no, I will not. I made this covenant to you and to this family. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Ruth doesn't choose the convenient thing. She doesn't even maybe necessarily choose the most logical thing. But in doing the hard thing, she does the right thing. Because, again, God doesn't promise that it's going to be easy, but God does care for Ruth and Naomi. And eventually they go back and they find security and they find a home, and Ruth is married, and then generations later from that lineage comes Christ. But if she would have done the convenient thing, the easy thing, it wouldn't have led to the same kind of result. This is what it means to be part of the church. A I've said this before, and I'm sure I'll say it many more times, but I believe that the goal of the church, one of the goals of the church, I should say, in the 21st century is to help take people with an attitude of consumer and transform them into servants. We may receive people who are looking for worship the way that they want it, the convenience of what it offers them. Does the needs, or do my needs get met in a particular church? But over time, through a maturation process in faith, the hope is that we move from that attitude of consumer to that of servant, which means putting aside convenience for the sake of the gospel. Now, this little book I was mentioning earlier has all these different chapters in it, and one of the chapters talks about the value of being together, breaking bread, having a meal together. And in just a moment, as the church, which we do every single month, we take the time to go through the liturgy and to tell the story of the Last Supper, which encapsulates all of the history of Israel and gets us to that point where Jesus then breaks the bread and he gives it to the disciples and said, "This is me, I offer this to you, this is my body which is given for you, and this cup represents my blood which is given for you." And we do this not because it's the most efficient or convenient way to receive a sacrament, but because it's the right way to do it. So I want to invite you to be thinking intentionally about the choices that you make. Are we guided or motivated by convenience? Or do we pause and take the time to say, is this what Christ asks of me? Is this what it means to be a Jesus follower, to be a disciple? And to let that guide our decision-making, our actions, the way that we spend our time, and the way that we move from consumer to servant. With that in mind, I invite you to join together in this liturgy as we participate in the breaking of the bread at Christ's table.